finally, that brings us to this past weekend. The IAH Gaza Flotilla, which took off from Turkey with a bunch of activists on there, trying to bring attention to the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israel's got a naval blockade, they won't let anybody in or out. They're trying to do humanitarian, nonviolent protest, which, if you've heard anything from me over this class, is if you're going to protest something, that's the way to do it. I don't like screaming and yelling and picketing and fighting, and I don't like people shooting each other. If you're going to protest something and make a statement, do it in a humanitarian sense and do it in a nonviolent sense. Okay? So they put together a flotilla. Flotilla is an old term meaning a bunch of ships. And they load it up with humanitarian aid and they ship it towards Gaza. Now, they know that there is a naval blockade by the Israelis in Gaza, and that's the point. They want to force the Israelis to come and make them stop. And then, when they make them stop, they can say, we're just trying to deliver humanitarian aid. And that then sheds light on the subject, and it puts pressure on the Israelis to lift and let in. That's the way it was supposed to happen. If you're going to do a humanitarian, non-violent protest, it had better be humanitarian, and it had better be non-violent. When the Israelis said stop, and they were told that they were going to stop these ships, they didn't stop. Obviously, that's how you do it. The Israeli commandos came on the ship, and these guys on the ship started, on one of the ships, not all the rest of the ships, but on one of the ships, started beating the crap out of the Israeli soldiers, who came down with paintball guns, and they weren't properly equipped because they were not trying to kill anybody. But they started getting beat up on, and anytime, this is why Martin Luther King was so brilliant, and this is why Gandhi was so brilliant. If you're going to protest, do it nonviolent. No matter how much they hit you, no matter what you do, don't fight back. Because as soon as you lift arms, as soon as you try to fight back, those people who are attacking you feel justified in taking you out. And as soon as they started beating these, the Israelis said, we're in danger, and started opening fire. Now, the people on that ship have knives and maybe an explosive and guns, maybe. It looks that way from the video, right? But as soon as you try to turn your humanitarian nonviolent protest into a violent protest where you're hitting the people who are trying to stop you, now those people feel, Israel in this case, feels justified in shooting back, which they did, killing 9 people. Now, in the grand scheme of things, this is a net loss for Israel. And this is now me moving away from my objective, and I'll begin to transition into kind of what I think, and you can begin to ask questions. This is bad for Israel. And what it will do is you're already hearing the international outcry. Israel will defend itself and say, look, we did what any other country would have done. If our soldiers are being attacked, we're going to fight back, and that's what they're saying. But I think in the grand scheme of things, there will be criticism, and there already is criticism within the Israeli government of saying you should have handled this better. There had to be a better way than 9 people ended up dying. Now, if it turns out that these humanitarian nonviolent protesters were shooting at the Israeli soldiers, or were beating them with pipes, or were throwing, then Israel will have a little better time saying that's why we shot back. But it still looks very, very bad for the Israelis, and I wouldn't be surprised if a week from now or 2 weeks from now, there's a funeral today in Turkey. Right? A lot of these people were with Turkey. A lot of this protest had met with members of the Hamas leadership in Gaza to make sure that the protest would go along, but it turned violent. Sometimes protests turn violent. I wouldn't be surprised if a couple weeks from now, with Mahmoud Abbas saying, you know, we really shouldn't, this is the Palestinian president, saying we really shouldn't have had that second intifada, and we're ready, he also said, according to the Washington Post, we're ready to sit down at the negotiating table whenever Prime Minister Netanyahu is ready. And I wouldn't be surprised if Prime Minister Netanyahu says, okay, let's sit down and talk about this, because this is really bad for Israel. Now, it's also very bad for Gaza, right? They still didn't get all that humanitarian aid. So I think, if I'm not sure on the facts here, they may have let some of that humanitarian aid in. I know that they've opened it up in the past. I know that Egypt has opened up their border. Remember, it's not just Israel that's blockading Gaza. Egypt is also blockading Gaza from the south. They don't want to mess with all the militants as well. But I know that Egypt has opened up its border, and now they're allowing materials to come in. Israel doesn't want Gaza, and Hamas specifically, to rearm, so that they don't have to have an Operation Cast Lead again. But if you shut off the border, you also shut off all the humanitarian aid, and that looks bad. That's the conflict.